The moment you open your eyes tomorrow morning, your body is already sending you a report. Not later, not after coffee, not once you start moving. Right then, in those first 30 seconds. And most people over 60 have been missing that report for years. Here is what nobody tells you. That slow start when you wake up, that heavy feeling before your feet even touch the floor, that moment where your mind is awake, but your body feels like it is still somewhere else. That is not laziness. That is not just age. That is your body handing you a detailed summary of everything that happened overnight and begging you to read it. But here is the problem. Most people roll over, grab their phone, rush into the kitchen, pour their coffee, and throw that report straight in the trash. And then they spend the rest of the day wondering why they feel foggy, why their balance feels slightly off, why their hands feel less steady than they used to, why their energy disappears after doing almost nothing. The answer was right there, in the first 30 minutes, every single morning. After 60, your body runs one of its most important maintenance cycles while you sleep. Repairs, fluid balance, brain cleanup, hormone shifts. And the moment you wake up, it shows you exactly how well that work went. The dizziness when you stand, the fog that takes too long to lift, the stiffness that should have passed by now, but hasn't, the heartbeat that feels slightly louder than it should, the feet that look puffier than they did last night. These are not random. They are not just getting older. They are a language. And once you learn to read it, you will never look at your mornings the same way again. Stay with me, because what comes next could change how you start every single day for the rest of your life. What your body is actually doing in the first 30 minutes after you wake up. You open your eyes, but your body does not always feel ready at the same speed as your mind. The room is quiet. The light is soft. And for a few seconds you stay still before doing anything else. That small pause may seem ordinary, especially after 55, yet it often carries more information than people realize. Many older adults assume this slow start is just age doing what age does, and they stop paying attention right there. But those first minutes after waking can reveal how well your body handled the entire night. During sleep, your body is not shutting down. It is running one of its most important maintenance cycles. Hormones shift, tissues repair, fluid balance changes, and the brain begins clearing away waste from the previous day. Think of it like a house being quietly reset before morning, with repairs, cleanup, and small adjustments happening in the background. When that overnight work goes smoothly, the body usually wakes with better balance, clearer thinking, and less resistance to movement. When that work is interrupted or incomplete, the body often says so early, and it usually says so softly. That is why the first 30 minutes matter more than most people think, especially after 60, when sleep becomes lighter and recovery less efficient. A little dizziness, unusual heaviness, mental fog or stiffness that feels stronger than it used to may not be random at all. These signs do not automatically mean something serious, but they do form patterns, and patterns are what the body uses to communicate. One of the most common mistakes is dismissing every morning change as normal aging before asking what may be driving it. In my view, that is where many people lose useful information their own body is trying to hand them. So, tomorrow morning, do something very simple before you reach for your phone, your slippers, or the rush of the day. Sit on the edge of the bed for about 20 to 30 seconds and notice how steady you feel in that quiet moment. Pay attention to your breathing, your balance, the clarity of your thoughts, and the way your legs respond when you prepare to stand. Then, stand up slowly and notice whether your body adjusts smoothly or whether it seems to need extra time to catch up. This is not a medical test. just a practical way to begin reading signals that often go unnoticed. You do not need to become fearful of every sensation, and you do not need to turn mornings into a health investigation. You simply need to become a little more observant, because the body often whispers long before it forces the issue. That whisper matters more after 55, when small changes in sleep, circulation, muscle recovery, and hydration can echo into the start of the day. Once you learn how to read those early signals, mornings stop feeling vague and start becoming surprisingly informative. And the next sign many people notice is not just slowness, but the way the body begins speaking a different language after 50. Why the body changes its language after 50. You wake up and notice that things feel just a little different than they used to, even if nothing seems dramatically wrong. You move a bit slower. You take a second before standing, and your body seems to ask for more cooperation than it once did. Most people describe this shift with a simple phrase, saying, "This is just getting older," and then they move on. But that explanation, while common, is incomplete and often hides patterns that could actually be understood. Because after 50, the body is not simply declining, it is adjusting the way it communicates with you. Several systems begin to change their rhythm in ways that are quiet but meaningful over time. Metabolism slows slightly, hormones that regulate sleep and recovery shift, and muscle tissue becomes more sensitive to inactivity. The nervous system, which helps coordinate balance and reaction, may take a fraction longer to respond to sudden changes. Think of it less like something breaking, and more like a system that now requires clearer signals and more consistent support. The body is still capable, but it becomes less forgiving when routines, hydration, or movement are not aligned. This is where many people misread what is happening and fall into a very common trap. They assume that because the changes are gradual, they are also unavoidable and not worth paying attention to. But the truth is, the body after 50 often gives more signals, not fewer. And those signals are actually more useful if you learn how to read them. What feels like random discomfort is often a pattern connected to sleep quality, circulation, muscle support, or hydration. The signal itself is rarely the full story. The pattern behind it is what really matters. So instead of asking, "Why am I getting older like this?" try asking a slightly different question starting today. Ask, "What is my body asking for that I may not be giving consistently?" Because that shifts your attention in a more useful direction. This week, begin noticing small repetitions, not isolated events, such as stiffness that appears every morning or fatigue that lingers longer than expected. Write nothing down if you do not want to. Just mentally observe patterns that show up more than once. That alone can change how you respond, because clarity tends to replace guesswork very quickly. You are not dealing with a body that is failing. You are dealing with a body that is speaking more subtly and more specifically. And in many cases, it is simply waiting for clearer inputs, not drastic overhauls or complicated interventions. Once you start recognizing that shift in language, the signals become easier to understand and less frustrating to experience. This is where things begin to feel less random and more manageable in a very practical sense. And to understand that even better, it helps to look at what actually happens inside your body while you sleep. What really happens inside your body overnight? While the house is quiet and the room is dark, your body is doing far more than simply lying still in bed. From the outside, sleep can look passive, almost like a pause. But internally, it is one of the busiest periods of the day. Repair begins, hormones shift, fluid balance changes, and the brain starts clearing what it no longer needs. That is why a rough morning does not always begin in the morning, because in many cases, it started during the night. And after 50, that overnight work often becomes lighter, shorter, or easier to interrupt without you fully realizing it. During deeper sleep, the body releases signals that support muscle repair, energy balance, and tissue recovery. The brain also uses this time to help wash away metabolic waste, which is one reason good sleep often leads to clearer thinking. A simple way to picture it is to imagine a city doing its repair work at night before traffic begins again in the morning. If the crews finish their work, the roads are clearer, the systems are steadier, and the next day begins more smoothly. If the work is delayed or interrupted, the effects may not look dramatic at first, but they usually show up somewhere. This matters more after 60 because deep sleep tends to become less stable and less abundant with age. People may sleep for several hours and still miss enough restorative depth to wake with fog, heaviness, or slow movement. That is where many adults get confused because they think time in bed automatically means full recovery, and it does not always work that way. The signal behind the signal is not just how long you slept, but how completely the body moved through its repair cycles. Once you understand that, a slow morning starts making more sense instead of feeling random or discouraging. So tonight, try one simple adjustment that gives your body a better chance to do that overnight work well. Keep the last part of the evening calmer than usual. Dim the lights a little earlier, and avoid going to bed mentally overstimulated. If you wake often, notice whether it happens after late meals, too much screen time, or falling asleep with tension still high in the body. You do not need a perfect routine, just a slightly better runway into sleep so the body can do its job more completely. And if this kind of calm, practical breakdown helps you notice things more clearly, that is exactly the kind of space worth staying connected to. Your body is not silent at night. It is simply speaking in processes instead of words. The morning is often where those nighttime processes reveal whether they worked smoothly or whether something got in the way. That is why paying attention to early signals is not overthinking. It is one of the smartest ways to protect independence later on. The body often gives quiet evidence before it gives obvious trouble, and that is a truth I think more people should hear. And one of the clearest examples of that appears the moment you first sit up and try to stand. Warning sign number 1. That dizzy moment when you first stand up. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, plant your feet on the floor, and rise the way you always have. Then, for a second, sometimes just 1 second, the room feels slightly off, and your head feels strangely light. It may pass so fast that you barely mention it, and many people simply call it a little head rush and move on. But when that moment starts showing up often, especially after 55, it deserves more attention than most people give it. Because the body is not being dramatic there, it is revealing how well it handles a sudden shift against gravity. When you are lying down, blood is distributed more evenly, and your heart does not have to fight the same downward pull. The moment you stand, gravity pulls blood toward the legs and lower body, and your system has to adjust very quickly. Your blood vessels need to tighten, your heart may need to speed up a little, and your brain still needs steady flow right away. Think of it like water pressure in a house when several faucets change at once, because the system has to rebalance fast. If that response is slower than it used to be, the brain may briefly get less support, and you feel it almost immediately. This tends to become more noticeable after 60, because blood vessels may be less elastic, and hydration often becomes less consistent overnight. Some medications can also make that transition harder, especially those that affect blood pressure, fluid balance, or heart rate. The common mistake is assuming that because the dizziness is brief, it must be harmless, and that is not always a wise assumption. The signal behind the signal is not just dizziness itself, but whether your circulatory system is struggling with a basic position change. And when that happens often, it may quietly raise the risk of stumbles, falls, and that hesitant feeling many older adults know too well. So tomorrow morning, do not stand up as if your body is still 30 and automatically ready for every fast transition. Sit at the edge of the bed for 20 to 30 seconds. Move your ankles a little and take 2 slow, steady breaths. Then rise gradually and give your system a chance to catch up before you start walking across the room. A glass of water early in the morning can also help more than people think, especially if you wake up dry or take certain medications. If the dizziness is frequent, worsening, or paired with chest symptoms, fainting, or real instability, that is a reason to speak with a clinician. This is not about becoming fearful of standing up, and it is not about treating every sensation like an emergency. It is about respecting a small signal that often appears before larger problems like falls begin affecting confidence and independence. Many people adapt to this by moving more cautiously without ever asking why the caution became necessary in the first place. But once you see the pattern, you can respond with more calm and more control instead of just brushing it aside. And another signal that often follows the same quiet pattern is the kind of brain fog that takes too long to lift in the morning. Warning sign number 2. Morning brain fog that takes too long to clear. You walk into the kitchen and for a brief moment forget why you came in there in the first place. The coffee is brewing, the house is waking up, but your thoughts still feel slower than the rest of the morning. Many people over 55 know this feeling well. That strange mental heaviness that lingers longer than it used to. Because it usually fades later, they brush it off and treat it like a harmless part of getting older. But when brain fog becomes a regular part of the first hour, it is worth reading more carefully. The brain depends on steady blood flow, oxygen, hydration, and enough deep sleep to wake up clearly and efficiently. If sleep was fragmented, the brain may not complete enough of its overnight cleanup and reset the way it ideally should. If you wake up mildly dehydrated, circulation can be less efficient, which may make mental sharpness slower to return. Think of it like trying to start a morning routine in a house where the lights are on, but the systems are still lagging. The brain is awake, but it may not yet be working under the best internal conditions for clarity and focus. This becomes more common after 60 because sleep quality changes, nighttime waking increases, and hydration patterns often worsen. Another common mistake is assuming that coffee is the first answer when the body may actually be asking for water and movement first. The signal behind the signal is not simply forgetfulness, but a brain that may be waking in a slightly under-supported state. That does not automatically point to something serious, but it can reflect a pattern that deserves consistent observation. And when that pattern repeats, it often tells you more than a single off morning ever could. So try something simple this week before reaching for screens, headlines, or sitting still too long after waking up. Drink water before coffee. Open the curtains or step into natural light, and let your body move for a few minutes first. Even a short walk down the hallway or around the kitchen can help increase circulation and speed up mental alertness. Keep the first part of the morning a little less rushed and a little more supportive, especially if fog has become familiar. If confusion feels sudden, severe, or noticeably worse than your usual pattern, that is not something to normalize or ignore. Your mind is not always failing when it feels slow in the morning, and that distinction matters more than people realize. Sometimes the brain is simply waiting for the right signals, enough hydration, and a cleaner transition out of sleep. That is why clarity often improves with simple support rather than force, panic, or harsh self-judgment. In my view, many older adults would feel less discouraged if they understood that difference earlier. And one of the next signs that often travels with this pattern is morning stiffness that takes too long to loosen up. Warning sign number 3. Stiffness that lasts longer than it should. You take your first steps in the morning and notice your body does not move as freely as it used to. Your knees feel tight, your lower back resists straightening, or your hips seem to need a few extra moments to cooperate. At first, it may feel like something small, something you can walk off in a minute or two without thinking much about it. But when that stiffness lingers longer than it used to, it starts becoming part of your routine rather than an exception. And that is where many people stop questioning it, even though it is quietly telling a deeper story. After 50, muscle mass gradually decreases in a process known as sarcopenia, and that changes how your body supports movement. Muscles are not just for strength. They stabilize joints, protect the spine, and help coordinate smooth motion with the nervous system. When muscle support becomes weaker or less active, joints tend to absorb more stress, and movement becomes less fluid. At the same time, low-level inflammation can rise slightly with age, especially when sleep or recovery is not consistent.
Think of it like a machine that still works, but now needs a gentle warm-up before it performs the way it used to.
The mistake many people make is pushing through stiffness too quickly or ignoring it completely as something inevitable. But the signal behind the signal is not just stiffness. It is how prepared your body is for movement after being still for hours. If it takes longer to loosen up, that may reflect reduced muscle support, joint sensitivity, or incomplete overnight recovery. That does not mean something is wrong in a dramatic sense, but it does mean the body is asking for a different start. And ignoring that request often leads to more cautious movement, less activity, and a gradual loss of confidence. So instead of forcing your body into motion, try preparing it for motion in a more intentional way, starting tomorrow. Before you fully stand, move your ankles in slow circles. Gently lift your knees one at a time and roll your shoulders back.
Give your joints a signal that movement is coming, rather than expecting them to respond instantly without preparation.
Even 2 or 3 minutes of gentle movement can reduce stiffness more effectively than pushing through discomfort. And if stiffness becomes painful, uneven, or progressively worse, that is worth discussing with a healthcare professional. This is not about avoiding movement. It is about making movement easier and more sustainable over time. Many people assume they need to tough it out, when in reality the body is asking for a slightly smarter approach. Once you respond to stiffness instead of ignoring it, mornings begin to feel more cooperative and less resistant. That small shift can make a meaningful difference in how confident and stable you feel throughout the day. And sometimes, even when the body feels rested, there is another signal that tells a different story entirely. Warning sign number 4. Waking up already tired.
The clock says you slept long enough,
And on paper, the night should have been enough to restore you. But when you sit up in bed, your body feels heavy. Your energy feels flat, and the day already seems harder than it should. This is different from ordinary grogginess, because it feels less like waking up and more like never fully recovering. A lot of adults over 55 live with this so often that they stop describing it as a symptom and start calling it normal. But waking up tired again and again is one of the clearest signs that sleep may not be doing its full job anymore. Sleep is not one smooth block of rest. It moves through cycles, and some stages are far more restorative than others. The deeper stages help with physical recovery, hormone balance, and the kind of repair that leaves you feeling truly restored. Lighter sleep can still give you hours in bed, but it may not give the same quality of recovery your body needs.
Think of it like staying in a hotel all night, but never really getting the deep quiet that lets you rest properly.
You were there for the time, but the conditions were not good enough to do what that time was supposed to do. This becomes more common after 60 because deep sleep often becomes shorter, lighter, and easier to interrupt. Breathing changes, pain, nighttime bathroom trips, stress, late meals, or restless legs can all chip away at restoration. The mistake is assuming that if you were unconscious for several hours, your body must have completed recovery. But the signal behind the signal is not only how long you slept, it is how restorative that sleep actually was. And when restoration falls short night after night, tired mornings start shaping the rest of the day in quiet ways. So this week, pay attention not just to bedtime, but to the quality of the runway leading into sleep.
Notice whether you eat late, fall asleep with television on, wake up multiple times, or feel mentally wired before bed. Try reducing one thing that may be fragmenting sleep, instead of changing everything at once and making it hard to sustain. Sometimes the most useful first step is not sleeping longer, but sleeping a little more deeply and a little more steadily. And if exhaustion remains strong despite a reasonable sleep window, that is something worth bringing into a medical conversation. You are not lazy because you wake up tired, and you are not imagining it because other people cannot see it. Non-restorative sleep can slowly drain energy, patience, balance, and motivation without looking dramatic from the outside. That is why I think this sign gets overlooked far too often in older adults who are still trying to stay independent. The body may look quiet in bed, but the quality of that quiet changes everything the next morning. And one of the next clues often shows up not in your head or your energy, but in the way your feet and ankles look. Warning sign number 5. Swollen feet or ankles in the morning. You step onto the floor, glance down, and notice your feet look puffier than they should so early in the day. Your socks leave deeper marks, your slippers feel tighter, or your ankles seem less defined than they did before bed. A lot of people expect swelling later in the evening, especially after standing or sitting too long, but morning swelling feels different. That difference matters because when it shows up early, it can point to overnight fluid shifts your body is not handling as smoothly. And after 55, those quieter changes deserve more attention than people usually give them. While you sleep, the body keeps regulating fluid through the kidneys, blood vessels, hormones, and circulation. If that balance is off, fluid may collect more easily in the tissues instead of moving and clearing the way it should.
Think of it like a drainage system that still works,
But not with the same efficiency when pressure, movement, or balance changes. Circulation, salt intake, hydration patterns, inactivity, and certain medications can all affect how much fluid lingers by morning. The feet and ankles often reveal this first because gravity and tissue structure make them easy places for fluid to settle. This does not mean every swollen ankle points to something serious, and I do not want to overstate what a single morning means. But the common mistake is treating recurring swelling as cosmetic, or assuming it only matters if it becomes dramatic and painful. The signal behind the signal is whether your body is consistently struggling with fluid balance, circulation, or recovery overnight. If swelling shows up often, seems uneven, or comes with breathlessness, chest pressure, or unusual fatigue, that changes the picture. That is where quiet observation becomes very important, because patterns are often more informative than one isolated episode. So this week, notice whether the swelling is mild and occasional, or whether it is becoming part of your normal routine. Check whether it improves after walking, whether it worsens after salty meals, and whether one side looks different from the other. Gentle movement during the day, staying reasonably hydrated, and avoiding long periods of sitting can help more than many people expect. If you elevate your legs for a short time and the swelling improves, that gives you another useful clue about what may be contributing. And if these kinds of simple observations help you feel more in control, that quiet kind of guidance is exactly why many people choose to stay close to a channel like this. Your body often shows fluid problems in small, visual ways before they feel urgent enough to interrupt the whole day. That is why the feet can become such honest messengers, even when the rest of the body seems relatively unchanged. You do not need to panic when you notice swelling, but you also do not need to keep explaining it away without watching the pattern. In many older adults, early signs like this are not random at all. They are part of a system asking for attention. And one of the next signals that often seems unrelated at first is waking up with a dry mouth or unusual thirst. Warning sign number 6. Waking up with dry mouth or unusual thirst. You wake up and your mouth feels dry, almost sticky, as if the night took more out of you than it should have. You reach for water sooner than usual,
sometimes even before fully sitting up, because your body feels like it is asking for it. Many people assume this is just from sleeping with their mouth open or the air being a little too dry. And sometimes that is true, but when it becomes frequent, it can point to something deeper than just the environment, especially after 55, when hydration balance becomes easier to disturb and slower to correct overnight. During sleep, your body continues regulating fluids through hormones that control how much water you retain or release. If that balance shifts, you may lose more fluid than expected, especially if you wake during the night or use the bathroom more often. Breathing through the mouth, certain medications, or even mild blood sugar fluctuations can also play a role here. Think of it like a slow leak in a system that should remain stable until morning, but instead loses a bit more than it should. By the time you wake up, your body is already trying to correct that imbalance, and thirst becomes the first signal. The common mistake is assuming thirst is always simple and harmless, without asking why it is happening so consistently. The signal behind the signal is not just dryness, but whether your body is struggling to maintain stable hydration overnight. If it comes with frequent nighttime urination, fatigue, or unusual hunger, it may point to patterns worth watching more closely. This does not mean something serious is happening, but repeated signals like this should not be completely ignored either. Your body rarely repeats a message every morning unless there is a reason behind it. So tonight, try a small adjustment instead of a complete routine change that feels hard to maintain. Drink water earlier in the evening rather than right before bed, and notice if that changes how you feel in the morning. Pay attention to how often you wake during the night and whether your mouth feels dry when you do. If you use medications, consider whether dryness started around the same time, as that connection is often overlooked. And if thirst feels excessive or comes with other unusual changes, that is worth discussing with a healthcare professional. You are not overthinking your body by noticing something as simple as dryness in the morning. Often, the smallest signals are the easiest to ignore and the most consistent when something needs adjustment. Once you start connecting these patterns, mornings begin to feel less confusing and more informative, and that clarity tends to reduce worry rather than increase it, because you understand what you are seeing. And another signal that often appears just as quietly is a change in how steady you feel when you start walking. Warning sign number 7. Feeling unsteady in your first steps. You get out of bed, take a few steps, and something feels slightly off in your balance. Not enough to fall, not enough to panic, but enough to make you slow down just a little. You may reach for a wall, a chair, or simply move more carefully until your body settles. Most people never describe this out loud because it feels too subtle to be important. But subtle balance changes are often one of the earliest signals the body gives. Balance is not controlled by one system alone. It depends on your inner ear, your vision, your muscles, and your brain working together. When you wake up, all of these systems have to reconnect quickly after hours of stillness. If circulation is slower, muscles are stiff, or the nervous system responds a bit later, that coordination may feel delayed. Think of it like a group of musicians starting slightly out of sync before finding their rhythm again. The movement eventually stabilizes, but that brief instability tells you something about the system. After 60, this becomes more noticeable, because reaction time, muscle strength, and sensory feedback all change slightly. The mistake is assuming that because you didn't fall, the signal does not matter. But the signal behind the signal is not the fall. It is the reduced margin of stability before a fall could happen. And that margin is exactly what protects independence over time, especially in daily movements. When that buffer becomes smaller, the body often starts asking for more caution before anything serious occurs. So tomorrow morning, pay attention to your first 5 to 10 steps instead of rushing past them. Notice if you feel centered right away, or if your body needs a moment to find its balance. Try placing your feet more deliberately,
standing tall, and letting your body stabilize before walking forward quickly. During the day, simple habits like light walking, gentle strength work, and balance exercises can make a meaningful difference. And if unsteadiness becomes frequent, worsening, or associated with dizziness or weakness, that deserves proper evaluation. This is not about fear. It is about awareness of one of the most protective systems your body has. Balance is quiet when it works well, and it only becomes noticeable when something begins to shift. The good news is that it often responds well to small, consistent support rather than drastic changes. And the earlier you notice it, the more room you have to strengthen it without pressure. And sometimes, right alongside balance changes, the body sends signals through something even more overlooked: your hands. Warning sign number 8. Weakness or clumsiness in your hands. You reach for a cup, a button, or a simple object, and something feels slightly less precise than it used to. Maybe your grip feels weaker, or your fingers take a second longer to respond the way you expect them to. You might drop something small and dismiss it as a distraction or just a moment of inattention. But when these small moments repeat, they often point to changes that deserve a closer look. Because the hands are one of the most sensitive ways your body reveals coordination and strength shifts. Your hands rely on a close partnership between muscles, nerves, and blood flow to work smoothly. When you wake up, that system has to re-engage after hours of reduced movement and different circulation patterns. If nerves are slightly slower, or muscles are less responsive, fine movements may feel less controlled at first. Think of it like trying to write with a pen that has not quite started flowing yet. It works, but not perfectly at the beginning. That small delay or weakness is often where the body quietly shows you how well that system is functioning. After 60, this becomes more common because muscle mass decreases and nerve signaling can become less sharp. The mistake is assuming it only matters if the weakness is severe or constant, which is not always the case. The signal behind the signal is not just dropping something, but noticing patterns of reduced precision or strength. If one hand feels noticeably different from the other, or if the change is progressing, that becomes more important. These early changes are often where awareness can make the biggest difference in maintaining independence. So this week, pay attention to how your hands feel during simple daily actions, instead of rushing past them. Notice your grip when holding a cup, turning a key, or opening a jar, and whether it feels steady or slightly uncertain. You can also try gentle hand movements in the morning, opening and closing your fingers, rotating your wrists, and waking up that connection. Light strength exercises, like squeezing a soft ball or using your hands more intentionally, can help maintain function over time. If weakness becomes sudden, significant, or one-sided, that is something that should be evaluated without delay. Your hands tell a story about strength, coordination, and nerve health long before larger limitations appear. And most of the time, they begin with small changes that are easy to overlook in a busy day. Once you start noticing them, you gain an early window into how your body is adapting. That awareness is not about worry. It is about keeping control over the small things that support independence. And another signal that often connects with these changes is something many people feel but rarely connect: a racing or irregular heartbeat in the morning. Warning sign number 9. A racing or irregular heartbeat soon after waking. You wake up, stay still for a moment, and suddenly become aware of your heartbeat in a way that feels unusual. It may feel faster than expected, a little uneven, or simply more noticeable even before the day has properly begun. Some people feel it in the chest, others in the throat, and some only notice that something feels subtly off. Because it often passes, many adults dismiss it as stress, a strange dream, or just one of those things.
But when your heartbeat keeps getting your attention in the morning, that pattern is worth understanding more clearly.
As the body wakes, several systems begin shifting at once, including hormones, blood pressure, breathing, and nervous system activity. That transition can briefly change heart rate, especially if sleep was poor, stress was high, or hydration is already low. Think of it like a car engine adjusting from idle to motion, because several systems are trying to synchronize at the same time. If that adjustment is smooth, you barely notice it. But if it is rougher, the heartbeat may feel louder or less steady. And after 60, these transitions can become more noticeable because the body tends to be less forgiving of small imbalances. The common mistake is assuming that every unusual heartbeat is either nothing or automatically something severe, and neither extreme is helpful. The signal behind the signal is whether this happens repeatedly, whether it lasts, and whether it comes with dizziness, breathlessness, or chest discomfort. Caffeine late the day before, dehydration, poor sleep, anxiety, or some medications can all shape how this feels in the morning. But patterns matter more than isolated moments, and that is why quiet observation is often the most useful first step. In my view, this is exactly the kind of topic people benefit from hearing regularly, because calm information prevents both panic and neglect. So this week, if you notice it, do not jump straight into fear and do not brush it aside without paying attention either. Sit still for a moment, take a slow breath, notice how long it lasts and whether it settles once you hydrate and begin moving gently. Pay attention to whether it follows poor sleep, alcohol, heavy evening meals, or unusually stressful nights, because those links are often revealing. If you want a simple habit, you can jot down when it happens and what the night before looked like, just enough to spot repetition.
And if this kind of grounded guidance helps you read your body with more confidence, that quiet support is often a good reason to stay connected and keep learning here. Your heart does not need to frighten you to deserve your respect, and that is an important distinction after 55. The goal is not to react to every sensation, but to notice when a sensation becomes a pattern with a clear rhythm of its own. That kind of awareness gives you more control, more clarity, and often a better conversation if you ever do need medical advice. Because the body usually gives clues in clusters rather than isolation, and this one rarely travels alone for long. And the next signal many people overlook is not in the chest itself, but in how often they need to get up and urinate at night. Warning sign number 10. Waking up frequently to urinate during the night. You wake up in the middle of the night, not once, but sometimes 2 or 3 times, needing to go to the bathroom. At first, it may seem like a small inconvenience, something many people your age mention casually. You get up, walk carefully in the dark, and return to bed, hoping to fall asleep quickly again. But over time, that repeated interruption starts to affect how rested you feel in the morning. And that is where this common habit becomes something worth paying closer attention to. During the night, your body is supposed to reduce urine production so you can sleep for longer, uninterrupted periods. This process is influenced by hormones that help the kidneys hold onto fluid while you rest. After 50, those hormonal signals may weaken, and the bladder can also become more sensitive or less able to hold volume comfortably. Think of it like a system that used to run quietly overnight, but now sends more frequent signals that it needs attention. That change may seem minor, but it can have a larger effect on sleep quality than most people expect. The mistake many people make is focusing only on the bathroom trips themselves, and not on what they interrupt. The signal behind the signal is fragmented sleep, because each time you wake, your body may struggle to return to deeper restorative stages. Over time, this can contribute to fatigue, brain fog, mood changes, and even balance issues the next day. It can also be linked to hydration timing, bladder health, blood sugar patterns, or prostate changes in men. So, while it may feel like a simple inconvenience, it often connects to a broader pattern in the body. So, tonight, Try adjusting one small habit instead of changing everything at once. Reduce fluid intake in the hour or two before bed, but stay well hydrated earlier in the day. Pay attention to whether caffeine or alcohol in the evening increases nighttime waking. Make sure the path to the bathroom is safe and well lit enough to reduce fall risk during those trips.
And if you are waking frequently every night, or the pattern is worsening, it is worth discussing with a healthcare provider. This is not just about sleep interruption. It is about what repeated interruption does to your overall recovery. Many people accept it quietly, without realizing how much it shapes their energy and clarity the next day. Once you start noticing the pattern, you can begin adjusting it in ways that are simple and manageable. And small improvements here can have a ripple effect on how your mornings feel. And as we move forward, there is one more signal that often ties many of these patterns together in a subtle but important way. The pattern behind the signals, how these signs connect. You may have noticed that none of these signs appear in isolation when you really start paying attention. The dizziness, the stiffness, the fatigue, the nighttime waking, they often show up in combinations rather than alone. At first, they can feel unrelated, like separate inconveniences that just happen to arrive around the same time in life. But the body rarely works in disconnected pieces, even when the symptoms seem to suggest that. And this is where the pattern becomes much clearer and much more useful. Many of these signs connect through a few shared systems, mainly sleep quality, circulation, hydration, and muscle support. If sleep is fragmented, recovery drops, and that can influence energy, stiffness, and even balance the next morning. If hydration is off, it can affect blood pressure, brain clarity, heart rhythm, and even how steady you feel when standing. Think of it like a set of gears that all depend on each other, where one small imbalance can affect several movements at once. That is why the body often speaks in clusters, not in isolated messages. The mistake is trying to solve each symptom separately without seeing the bigger picture behind them. The signal behind the signal is often a shared root, not 10 different unrelated problems appearing at the same time. When people chase each symptom individually, they often feel overwhelmed and unsure where to begin. But when you step back and look for what connects them, the path forward becomes much simpler and more practical. And in my view, this is one of the most important shifts a person can make after 55. So instead of asking, how do I fix each of these? Try asking, what patterns do they share? Starting this week. Look at your sleep consistency, your hydration habits, your movement during the day, and your evening routine. You do not need to change everything. Just identify one area that seems slightly off and begin there. Often, improving one core area creates small improvements across several symptoms at the same time. That kind of approach is not only more effective, it is also far more sustainable over the long term. Your body is not giving you 10 separate problems. It is giving you a connected message through different channels. Once you learn to see that connection, the signals stop feeling random and start feeling structured. That structure gives you clarity, and clarity reduces both confusion and unnecessary worry. Because when you understand the pattern, your next step becomes much more obvious and much more manageable. And now, the question becomes how to turn that understanding into something you can actually apply this week. A simple 7-day reset to read your body more clearly. By this point, the goal is not to memorize every signal, but to make your own pattern easier to see. Most people do not need a complicated reset, a strict schedule, or a long list of rules to begin helping the body. What they need is a calmer structure that reduces noise and makes the real signals easier to notice. That matters even more after 55, because too much change at once usually creates confusion instead of clarity. A simple week of better observation can often teach you more than months of vague concern.
Start with 4 anchors: a steadier wake time, early hydration, gentle morning movement, and a calmer evening routine. These are not dramatic interventions, but they support the same systems we have been talking about all along. Sleep tends to respond to rhythm, circulation responds to movement, and the brain responds to consistency more than intensity. Think of it like clearing a foggy window, because the body often becomes easier to read when daily inputs are less chaotic. When the noise comes down, the pattern usually becomes much easier to recognize. The mistake many people make is trying to fix everything in one burst of motivation and then abandoning it 3 days later.
The signal behind the signal, even here, is whether your routine helps the body stabilize or keeps it guessing every day. So do not chase perfection this week. Just repeat the basics well enough to let your body respond. Notice whether mornings feel steadier, whether stiffness eases faster, and whether your sleep feels a little more restorative. This is educational, not medical advice, and if symptoms are sudden, severe, or new, talk to a clinician. A practical version of this week can be very simple and still be effective enough to teach you something useful. Wake at roughly the same time, drink water early, move gently for a few minutes, and keep late evenings a little quieter. Cut down one thing that seems to worsen your mornings, whether that is late eating, late screens, or too little movement. You do not need to do all of it beautifully. You just need enough consistency to see what changes and what does not.
That kind of reset is often where confidence begins, because it replaces guessing with evidence from your own body. You are not trying to become perfect, and you are not trying to control every sensation that shows up with age. You are simply creating better conditions so the body can speak more clearly and recover a little more completely. That is a respectful way to care for yourself, because it works with the body instead of fighting it. And once you do that for even 1 week, the next step becomes much easier to understand. Because the final piece is not just what to watch, but how to live with these signals without fear and without neglect. Living with these signals without fear and without ignoring them. At some point, the goal stops being just identifying signals and starts becoming how you relate to them day after day. Because knowing what to watch is only useful if it leads to a calmer, more confident way of living with your body. Many people fall into one of 2 extremes, either worrying about every small change or ignoring everything until it becomes obvious. Neither approach works well over time, especially after 55, when subtle patterns matter more than dramatic ones. What works better is something quieter, more balanced, and far more sustainable. Your body is not trying to scare you, and it is not failing randomly as the years go by. It is adapting, responding, and communicating in ways that may feel unfamiliar, but are often consistent once you recognize them. Think of it like learning a language you were never formally taught, one that becomes clearer the more you listen, without panic. When you remove fear from the process, you create space for understanding, and that changes how you respond. And when you remove neglect, you give yourself the chance to act earlier while changes are still manageable. The mistake is believing you need perfect control or perfect knowledge to take care of your health properly.
The signal behind the signal, even here, is that your body responds more to consistency than to intensity or perfection. You do not need to fix everything, and you do not need to react to every sensation as if it demands immediate action. You need to notice patterns, respond calmly, and support the systems that keep you steady, clear, and independent. That approach is not only more realistic, it is far more effective over time. So, moving forward, keep things simple and grounded in what you have already started to observe. Pay attention to your mornings, respect small changes, and adjust gently rather than dramatically when something feels off. Stay consistent with the basics that support sleep, movement, hydration, and balance, because those are your foundation. And when something feels clearly different, persistent, or concerning, if this video helped you, the next one might reveal something important about your body. Take a moment to watch it now. You may notice something you've been ignoring.